First and second year players all contributing. There's Hassan Reddick, the one-time Arizona Cardinal. Obviously knows Jonathan Gannon well, their time at Philly together. The Arizona Cardinals have won 4 straight, 5-1 in their last 6.
A few moments later.
Hubbard to the Hubbard, dancing into the end zone, and a Panthers victory with a touchdown in overtime. Cardinals eliminated from the playoffs.
And just like that, the Arizona Cardinals season comes to an end. 8 wins, 9 losses, locking up pick number 16 in the 2025 NFL Draft, with plenty of cash to spend coming up in the offseason. Now, the season did not end how we wanted it. Obviously, finishing 8-9, being 6-4 at the bye week, 4 wins on the trot, top spot in the NFC West, and sadly only being able to get 2 wins to close out the year, being eliminated by the Carolina Panthers, who had the worst defense in NFL history, allowing the most points in NFL history, and to get knocked out by that team is a real kick in the gut. But what can we do? Moving forward, the season's over. 2024 is in the books. We doubled our wins from the previous season, which is a step in the right direction. The division was there for the taking. Unfortunately, we just couldn't do it. But now, moving into 2025 and the offseason, how can we look at this Cardinals team? Where can they improve? Where can they spend cash? That's sort of what this video is going to be about. Mainly going to be focusing on free agent spending, looking at the cap, some cut candidates for dead money, and I will hint at a little trade towards the end, which is why I've thrown in the draft picks here. You can see we've got 5 draft picks on certain sites. However, we do have 6 draft picks in total because we obtained a 7th round pick from the Kansas City Chiefs in exchange for Cameron Thomas, the outside linebacker we traded just before the season starts. So we do have 6 picks, which I will hint, like I said, at a little trade towards the end of the video, which is why I'm sort of throwing in the draft picks here. Now, with that being said, the 2025 offseason can hopefully start the complete opposite of how the 2024 season ended, and that's in a positive note. We're currently sitting 4th overall in terms of cap space and effective cap space. Now, I've had a little look at the Commanders roster, and they're most likely going to bring back a few of their players, so I think their cap will drop slightly, whereas the Cardinals can create additional cap space of about $20 million to sit around that $90 million mark with some post-June 1 cuts. So there's going to be a lot of money to spend, and you can see as well in that third column, the Cardinals have 60 players signed to their team at the moment, compared to the Commanders, Chargers, Bears, Vikings that sort of have between 45 to 52 players signed on their team at the moment. There are a lot of positions that can be filled in free agency for the Cardinals, particularly looking at defensive tackle, edge, if we want inside linebacker, if we want guard, and again, I'll hint at a certain trade towards the end of the video, so if you think I've left out a position such as wide receiver, just stick around, I'll get to that shortly. And just quickly going to touch on the dead cap. There's not too much to go over here. Majority of it is from 2 prior cuts, DJ Humphries and D-Hop, and then you've got obviously the Cam Thomas trade, which has left some dead cap, and then some late round picks and undrafted guys that have been cut, so there's a bit of dead money there, but overall in pretty good shape in comparison to the rest of the league. In terms of the salary cap calculator, we've got here all these contracts that are highlighted in pink that have the undo button there. Those are all post-June 1st cuts, and the reason I've allocated them as post-June 1st cuts is just purely because more cap would be saved in 2025 if these players were cut post-June 1st. Jonah Williams actually picked up 2 knee injuries last season, the last being, or looking like it was more severe and would keep him off the field for what would appear sometime in 2025. So it would just make sense to move on and save that additional $10 million that you can spend elsewhere. Jalen Thompson, sort of the emergence of Rabbit Demerson, 4th round pick, it's basically sort of made Jalen Thompson expendable. You've got Budda Baker, who's making big money and sort of the leader of that defense. And again, $10 million can be saved if you move on from Jalen Thompson post June 1st, which is most likely going to happen. You're not going to really... Well, if you look at teams around the league, no one's really paying big money to safeties, and no one's paying big money to 2 safeties. So it's pretty safe to assume both those players will get cut, freeing up $20 million in cap space, which will sort of take it to that $90 million mark. And then you've got some smaller contracts you can possibly move off from. Justin Jones, again, you'd have just over $8 million dead cap, and you'd only save about $3 million. So whether or not it is a possibility. Whether or not that happens, I'm not too sure. Same goes with Sean Murphy-Bunting, where you'd have $6.5 million in dead cap, and you'd only be saving just shy of $3.5 million. Whether or not that's a good move, again, everyone will have their own opinion. Again, it's not too much of a saving, but there is a saving that can be made with that cut there, especially because his play was not ideal for a veteran corner to come in and sort of be the leader of that group, subpar to say the least, especially in the first half of the season. And then Bilal Nichols, who I just threw this one in because there's a lot of chatter about both Bilal Nichols and Justin Jones being terrible signings. Whether they're terrible or not, they both ended up having season-ending injuries, so we didn't really get a full sort of sample space of them on this team to sort of have a proper judgment of how good they actually were as signings. However, basically having $8 million in dead cap and saving very minimal amounts of money in terms of how much cap space is available to NFL teams, it might not be worth moving on from. And just on the second page, we've got a few more contracts to look at. I haven't really cut or inputted anyone to cut from these contracts. The only one that really sort of could be an option is maybe DJ Dallas, where if you cut him pre-June 1st, it saves about $2.4 million in cap space, which would probably be the only realistic move from this list. And again, it's only a small amount of money whether or not he gets cut. He was our return specialist. And again, with Michael Carter being signed, you've got Trey Benson, who was drafted in the 3rd round. You've got Amari DiMercado, and of course, you've got the big dog, James Conner. So he is expendable. And another reason why he might be expendable, which correlates back to the trade I've been hinting at all video, is there is a certain all-pro punt returner who can also be a kick returner for us through the trade. So there's another reason why DJ Dallas could also be a potential cut candidate. And literally, just as I had recorded the cap space section, the cap space for the NFL was announced, and it's slightly higher than what over the cap was projecting. They were projecting initially it was going to be around $272 million, and it's come in at $279 million. So it's about $7 million in additional cap space. So the Cardinals jump up from that mid sort of 60 range to anywhere between 72 and 76 million in cap space. Mind you, again, we've got more players currently signed to the team than the teams above us and the teams below us as well. So like I said before, I do believe we're going to jump the Commanders. They've got a few key players that they probably would look to bring back. And again, the Cardinals can clear upwards of $20 million in cap space, so we'd be sitting at around $96 to $100+ million in cap space. So really, really exciting times. Hopefully the money is going to get spent and spent on some big names, not bargain-based shopping like we did last offseason. Now, just quickly going to touch on a few guys that I think we should probably bring back at the right price. Baron Browning, we already traded for him, a 6th-round pick. Went over to Denver to get him in. I think if you can bring him back as sort of just like a 3rd down, 4th down designated pass rusher on the cheap, say a $3 million. He's projected here to make 5.4, but on PFF he was projected to make about $3 million. Really nothing when you're looking at it having $100 million in cap space. So just a cheap guy to bring back with some upside as a designated pass rusher. And then you've got Kelvin Beachum and Will Hernandez. I think these are sort of no-brainers to bring back. Will was phenomenal in pass protection. Beecham also a very solid swing tackle, can play both sides and is very reliable. There was a stretch where he did not allow single pressure for about 3 or 4 weeks during the season, so I think both of those guys you'd look to bring back. Whether they start or not, it's a different story, because I'm not sure who we're going to bring in free agency or via the draft, but 2 guys I would definitely love to have back. If Will didn't get injured, I think that's a no-brainer to re-sign and have him play right guard going into the new season. And just lastly, I'm going to touch on Jesse Luketa, who's a restricted free agent, but it looks like the tender for him is about 3.1 mil, which is just a little bit too rich for me, and I'd rather bring back Baron Browning for that sort of 3 milish range rather than Jesse Luketa. And there are a few other guys that I haven't really touched on, like Greg Dortch and obviously Aaron Brewer, our long snapper, who we'd probably have to re-sign, but again, that's like probably $1 million, so it's not really a big sort of must re-signing. And then with Greg Dortch, he didn't really make too much of an impact last year, and then sort of with the trade I will hint at shortly, sort of replaceable in that sort of way via the trade. So let's jump straight into the trade scenario I had planned for our offseason, and that's sending our 7th round pick that we acquired from the Chiefs in the Cam Thomas trade, which is why I sort of brought it up earlier in the video, for Saints wide receiver Rashid Shaheed, who's not only a deep threat, he can play in the slot, and he can also return punts and kicks, as he was an all-pro punt returner in 2023. Now, he's 27 years old. He's coming off a meniscus injury, which has kept him sidelined for, his recovery is 4 to 6 months. So he will be ready when the season's set to start. However, he is coming off an injury, which is why we can sort of, I think, get him for a sort of cheap trade, a 7th round pick. If you recall, the Cardinals traded a 6th and a 7th round pick for Robbie Anderson. Not in the same year, but that's sort of what I'm sort of looking at. Maybe a 7th round pick this year, a 6th round pick next year, or just a 7th round pick given that he's coming off an injury. But if the Saints do trade him, they save about $3.7 million against the cap. They're already in cap hell. They're about negative $50 million so they're basically $50 million over the cap. They need a clear cap. They've been kicking the can down the road with all these contracts, and now it's finally come back to bite them. So I don't see a world where they actually give him an extension or re-sign him. He's 27 years old. The Cardinals, like I said, need a deep threat. He would be a perfect fit as a deep threat. You can see, I'll put his sort of grades from PFF in terms of his deep sort of yardage, grading and yards. You can see last year, again, only played a few games, but most of his yardage came from plus 20 yards down the field. We need sort of someone that can stretch the field like this, get Marvin more involved over the middle and sort of the intermediate parts of the field. So I think this would be a phenomenal trade for the Cardinals. Like I said, a 7th round pick, a throwaway pick. I don't think you're getting any sort of better player in that 7th round as sort of a deep threat wide receiver. And I love Shaheed. I just love watching him play. If Derek Carr can hit this guy deep for big chunk plays, I don't see why Kyler Murray can't. I think it would drastically help our offense. And the one thing I will say is Clint Kubiak, who was the Saints OC, again, this might be a little bit conspiracy theory-ish, but he's now with the Seattle Seahawks. There's been rumors that DK Metcalf might be traded, so that's one to watch as well. In case they do trade Metcalf, do they go for a cheaper option in Shaheed and bring him in and reunite him with Clint? I hope not, because quite frankly, I think us trading a 7th round pick to try to get this guy in the building would be a A+ move. And not only would it tick the box, like I said, from a deep threat point of view, but then he would replace Dortch and DJ Dallas. I did mention him earlier as a cut candidate, would save just over $2 million. So Shaheed's contract would basically be covered by cutting Dallas, not re-signing Dortch, and he would cover both of their roles from, like I said, punt returns, kick returns, and also be an improved deep threat option for our team. With that trade, we've now added an additional piece for Kyler Murray. We've got a deep threat. We've got someone who can play in the slot, can play outside, and can return punts and kicks at an all-pro level, who's also going to be very cheap this year. If we extend him, cool. If we don't, it's a 7th round pick flyer on a guy, so not that big of a deal. Now, looking at a few positions that we are in desperate need of improvement, one being edge rusher and two being the interior defensive line. I'm going to touch on edge rusher first. There's two guys on this list. This is on the PFF free agency sort of rankings page. Khalil Mack, 34 years old. He's ranked as the number one edge rusher that's hitting free agency. He's a bit too old for my liking. I know he's had a good season. He's had probably 2 good seasons with the Chargers, but 34 years old is just too old for me. It gives me some Terrell Suggs vibes. Great player, might be a Hall of Famer, but no thank you. Josh Sweat and Hassan Reddick is where I sort of pique my interest in this free agent edge rusher group. Josh Sweat, 28 years old when the season starts, and he's played for Jonathan Gannon, had his best year under Jonathan Gannon, a stout run defender. He's not an elite player, he might not be a great player, but he's a really, really good player. He knows the system, he knows Gannon, he doesn't miss games, and he is consistently going up against opposition left tackles compared to the other members of that Philadelphia Eagles D-line. So he's usually got the toughest assignment, so it might not show necessarily in the stats department, but he's a great player and he'd be a great addition to this team. Hassan Reddick, like I said, we saw at the start of the video and also at the end of the Jets game, he embraced Jonathan Gannon. They both embraced each other, and it looked like they were having some really, really healthy sort of conversation there for a brief period of time, and I would be very much for bringing Hassan Reddick back. I think last year of the Jets was just a complete and utter write-off. I would not go off that 1 year where he didn't have a preseason. He missed half the year. He came in and was sort of just like, yeah, I'm here. I'll sort of finish out the season and I'll leave somewhere else. What a terrible trade for the Jets. I still think he has juice left. I still think he can come here and contribute on a 1 or 2 year deal. Quite frankly, I wouldn't mind bringing both Reddick and Sweat. That might be a bit too much money and too unrealistic, but both guys I would love to see on this team, and for Hassan Reddick back on this team. Malcolm Kuntz, another sort of name to look out for. Younger player, but he missed all of last year after having a really productive 2023 season. I'm a bit on the fence about Malcolm Kuntz. Like I said, don't like the fact he's coming off an injury that kept him out for the entire year. And he's probably going to get a bit less than Sweat, but I still anticipate him getting a fair load of money. Will he be back for the Raiders? Maybe. They've got a lot of cap space, more cap space than the Cardinals, so we could see him returning to the Raiders. But like I said, Josh Sweat, I think, is priority number 1 out of this edge group. Hassan Reddick, probably priority number 2. You can go down the list on the PFF site, but these are sort of the guys I'm looking at. Like I said, we're probably going to have the 3rd most cap space in the league. So we're kind of looking to sort of solidify this group with some high-end, high-paying players. Not going to cheap out like we did last year. So Josh Sweat, number 1 target for me. Hassan Reddick, number 2 target. And just quickly before I touch on the defensive tackles, free agency is where you fix your needs. You don't go into the draft having needs and wanting to draft for need. You want to take the best players available on the board. So I know Steve Keim used to always say this, but he was a complete and utter shitter as a GM. So don't let Steve Keim affect your way of thinking when it comes to draft best player available. Free agency is where you fill your needs, and we need edge help desperately. Moving on to the interior defenders, I'm not going to really waste too much time going over some of the guys lower down on the list, like a Tershawn Wharton, Poona Ford, DJ Jones. They're not really guys I'm sort of eyeing to sign or would be overly excited if we signed. They give that sort of Justin Jones, Bilal Nichols type of vibe, so not really interested in signing these guys. They're just on the list there. I thought I'd note them down, but the 2 big fish that we should want to get, or at least get one of these guys, I think unrealistic to get both, but Osa Digizua from the Cowboys, and of course Milton Williams from the Philadelphia Eagles. Williams probably has been my number 1 free agent target dating back to November, where I stated, this guy was not only drafted to play for the Eagles when Gannon was the defensive coordinator there, but has also really had a coming out party this year, like just unbelievable as a pass rusher. 26 years old, he's just entering his prime in terms of a pass rusher, and he very eerily gives me sort of vibes of like the Javon Hargrave signing when Philly went and signed him from Pittsburgh, and he helped them get to a Super Bowl. They didn't end up winning it, but he helped them get to a Super Bowl. Then he signs with the 49ers, and the 49ers go to a Super Bowl. So not saying that if we sign Milton Williams, we're going to go to a Super Bowl, but it's that type of play that gives me that sort of vibe. I think signing Milton Williams should be the number one priority. I don't care how much money you throw at this guy. He's a fucking beast, and we need him on this team ASAP. He should be the very first name that's announced as an Arizona Cardinal come free agency in March. Like, this guy is unbelievable. I'll pull up a graph here as well. You can sort of see sort of the pressure rate in terms of interior defenders, and he's on another level. Like, no one's even near him. Like, it's him, Chris Jones, sort of the two guys from the interior that have been able to get to the quarterback really consistently and at such a high level. So I think he's obviously priority number one. Priority number two, Osa Digizua. He's going to get a lot of money as well. I just prefer Milton Williams just because he's played under JG, he's familiar with the scheme, and there's a bit of a relationship there. Whereas Osa, on that same tier, he's such a great player, really, really good interior defender. He will get a lot of money too. But just for me personally, I slightly lean towards Milton Williams. And that'll kind of do it in terms of the interior defenders, like Levi Onwuzurike, like whatever. BJ Hill, a bit of an older guy, but a solid player. Not really names that sort of stand out too much for me. And then if we sort of move on to some like lesser needy positions, like as inside linebacker, I don't think it's a desperate need compared to how bad our D-line has been for quite a few years now. One thing I will sort of leave this little nugget there is if we do end up signing, multiple defensive linemen and then go into the draft where it's a defensive line heavy draft and pick up a few more pieces there, do we see Zaven Collins move back to inside linebacker? That would be, I think, a really good move. And also, if we do have an influx of talent on our D-line, why not move him back there? And then I think it'd be quite an upgrade personally over Kaiser White as an inside linebacker. But if we are looking to sign someone, again, Gannon doesn't really place too much of an emphasis on inside linebackers. You can go look at who his linebackers were in Philly, mainly sort of like Kaiser White, who was he just sort of came over from the Chargers. I believe he might have been a safety at one point, sort of converted to inside linebacker, and then the undrafted linebacker TJ Edwards as well, who was signed by the Bears. So not a lot of draft capital thrown at that position while he was there. So I doubt we sign any sort of big names like a Nick Bolton or a Zach Bourne. Zach Bourne, I doubt he leaves Philly. Or a Dre Greenlaw who's coming off an Achilles. I kind of don't want anything to do with that. So maybe we see a guy like a Jamian Sherwood from the Jets signed, where he can be that sort of coverage linebacker, and you can have, if you do end up moving Zaven Collins, he can be that sort of more around the box, run-stopping inside linebacker, and you've got Sherwood, who can cover up players, who also was a safety before. Now he's converted to inside linebacker. That's Jamian Sherwood. And again, we've got Mac Wilson Sr. there as well. So I think that'd make a really strong inside linebacking group. And then you've got Owen Papo as well, who was drafted a few years ago. So again, I don't think they'll place too much priority on this. If we see a signing, it might be someone like a Jamian Sherwood. And then finally, if we're looking at the offensive line sort of free agency group, not too many names that stick out for me, unfortunately, like the tackles. We'd need a right tackle, and the only sort of two right tackles there are Morgan Moses. Well, if you're going to sign him for me, might as well just bring back Beecham and not sign Morgan Moses. And then you've got Jedrick Wills, who we could take a flyer on Jedrick Wills, like he played right tackle at Alabama, and he was really good for the Crimson Tide, but he has not been too good for the Cleveland Browns playing left tackle. And he's just had quite a bit of injuries as well. So if we do take a flyer on a free agent tackle, it might be someone like a Jedrick Wills, which I wouldn't be opposed to. And then if we look at the guards as well, similar sort of story. A lot of these guards have either been injured last year or have a history of being injured, apart from the top dog, Trey Smith. Do you really want to pay that much for a guard? Not really my forte. I much prefer to draft our offensive line and sort of develop them like the Eagles have. For me, maybe we see a signing like a Tevin Jenkins, who has had issues staying healthy, which is the big issue. This is why Chicago are letting him go. He can't stay on the field as often as you'd like him to be. When he's on the field though, He is a great guard. So that could be a name to watch out for, especially because we do like to run the ball a lot. We could see Tevin Jenkins. But none of these guys really stand out. Like a Will Fries, who had a really good start to the year, and then he broke his legs. So again, coming off an injury. James Daniels coming off an Achilles. Like, a few of these guys are just quite old. So bit of a risk there in terms of the guard market and the right tackle market. But again, to sort of close out my final thoughts on how we should be spending our money this free agency period, it is D-line for sure. Go get Milton Williams. Go get Josh Sweat. Go get Hassan Reddick. And then we can go into the draft and not have to worry about filling these needs. You just take the best player available, whether it's adding a Mike Green, whether it's adding a James Pierce Jr., whether it's adding like a big nose tackle like a Kenneth Grant, whether it's adding to the offensive line, such as a Josh Simmons, or Josh Simmons played left tackle at Ohio State, but prior was playing right tackle at San Diego State, and Ahmad Membu has been the right tackle at Mizzou. So, like I said, the priority positions I think this free agency will be the D-line. Go get a defensive tackle. Go get an edge rusher or two, and then complement that with maybe signing a guard like a Tevin Jenkins, but sort of work in an incentive-based contract where he gets more money the more time he's on the field, because he's struggled to stay on the field. So that's sort of the guy I'd look for in this sort of guard class. Maybe a Will Fries as well. And then again, like if we want to touch on like inside linebacker, maybe a Jamian Sherwood to sort of play that coverage role, just because we've been lacking in really good coverage linebackers. Or the wide receiver position, I would try to get a trade done with the Saints to get a deep threat. Not only a deep threat, like I said, but a kick returner and a punt returner at an all-pro level. So with that being said, if you did stick around this long, thank you so much for watching the video. Please leave a comment down below with who you'd want to sign in free agency, which players you'd want to bring back, who are set to become free agents from the Cardinals team. And I've got a few more videos planned to come out in the near future. Obviously, I'm going to do a video in relation to the free agents we do sign and just chat a bit about those guys. And then obviously leading up to the draft, the combine's around the corner. And then obviously some pro days and then the draft itself. So definitely looking forward to making some draft videos, especially because post-free agency, draft needs change. And then we can get into a bit more detail which players the Cardinals should be going for with their draft picks. So again, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, I'll see you then.